Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the May 18th meeting of the MCE Board of Directors. And Don Tatson and Kevin Wilk, I hope that you are out there virtually joining us.
We are here.
Fantastic. That's great. Woo.
Hopefully you can hear us.
We have liftoff. We can hear you. Fantastic. We may be able to hear you better long distance than we can when you're here, so this is pretty exciting. Don Tatson from City of Lafayette and Kevin Wilk from City of Walnut Creek are with us remotely. I don't know. They didn't want to make the drive. I don't get it. So that's great. That's so far so good on the technology. All right. So first on our agenda are board announcements. Any board members have anything they'd like to announce? Oh, seeing none. Public open time. Is there anyone from the public who'd like to talk on something not on our agenda? Good evening. So do we think that mic is on? Let's just confirm. It's not turning my, yeah, there we go. I'll get really close. Okay. We got us so trained to stay distant that it's hard to learn new tricks.
Good evening. My name is Helen Marsh, and I live in Tiburon. And I came to speak to you at the January board meeting to inform you about a project that I was working on with a colleague, Sarah Loughran, through the Environmental Forum of Marin. And I'm here tonight to give you an update on the results of our work. So our goal was to persuade the County of Marin and 7 of its municipalities to use 100% renewable electricity for all municipal accounts starting in July of this year. As all of the municipalities use light green, deep MCE light green, opting up to deep green is the most cost-effective way to do this and goes a long way to meeting the municipal greenhouse gas emission reduction goals in the climate action plans. We've been working across the county, meeting with town staff, council members, and attending council hearings. We gathered together 19 local supporting groups to work with us in getting residents to attend hearings and write to their council members. It's been a collaborative group effort. I'm pleased to report that the project has been successful, and we're fairly confident that starting on July 1, almost all municipal accounts in Marin will have switched to deep green. That equates to an £8 million annual greenhouse gas reduction in Marin. And this is represented by the area in the large red eclipse on your handout. The smaller eclipse represents those accounts that we hope will also switch to deep green within the next year. This is such a testament to the environmental leadership in Marin. It's amazing. You serve as a model for other communities in California and across the country, and we're enormously proud to be citizens of this community. Sarah and I understand that municipal electricity emissions are only 3% of total emissions in Marin. So starting this summer, we'll be turning our attention to other sectors, namely businesses, special districts, and residents. Marin Municipal Water District is committed to deep green, and we understand that North Marin Water District is also considering this switch. However, in Marin, the community adoption is only 2%. So our next project is to increase that number. For example, Fairfax has been a deep green member since 2010, and their adoption rate is 7.3%. We hope to be able to use municipal adoption as a leverage to increase community adoption. We'd like to thank MCE staff, namely J.R. Killigrew and Jenna Famular, who've done a terrific job of supporting us, and also the board for the first-class work that you do to provide renewable energy in our community. Thank you very much.
Oh, really, thank you. You and Sarah have done just a fantastic job, and really, you know, this is all about trying to get ahead of El Cerrito, and so we are very pleased that we're hopefully making some strides here in the county, but I really appreciate your effort. It's very exciting, and I'm glad that you'll be keeping it up. And I know that our staff here at MCE has worked hard to help you out. So this has just been a great success for everybody. And we at the County of Marin are looking forward to having a vote by our board to go deep green too. So, yeah. And then I think some of our outliers maybe are Tiburon, and they'll be hearing from us all. So thank you so much. Anyone else from the public who'd like to speak in open time on matters not on our agenda? Seeing none. Dawn, report from Chief Executive Officer.
So the first item that I have on my report is we have a new director joining us tonight, Director Arturo Cruz from the City of San Pablo. It's a pleasure to have you here, and we're going to go through the oath of office, if you're willing. So we'll do that first, if you're able to stand up. Raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, Arturo Cruz, do solemnly swear or affirm that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of California against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to take the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of California, that I take this obligation freely, without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties upon which I am about to enter. Welcome to the board.
Thank you.
Just a couple of other items to update folks on since we missed our meeting last month. This is a little bit longer than usual, but I'll move quickly. So I wanted to let folks know that we are recording via Skype from the remote location in Lafayette for the first time. And Director Tapson and Director Wilk are both at that location, which is also open to the public. So there may be moments where we pause to see if anyone from the remote public location would like to weigh in on items as we go through. We do not yet, they are able to see us, at least that is the theory. We do not yet have a camera in that location, but that will be the next step, is making sure that we can also see them. So we're working on that. So bear with us if we have any technical difficulties, but we're really excited that we're able to accommodate this to help folks not have to get on the freeway and burn more fossil fuels to get to our meetings, but still be able to participate. So thanks for bearing with us. Also, I wanted to let folks know that we have new microphones. As you may have noticed, these are voice activated, so you don't have to push any buttons. The red light indicates that the mic is on because it hears someone talking. So we'll just have to be extra careful not to interrupt each other, because if someone starts talking while someone else is talking, then someone is going to get cut off. So that's just something to keep in mind. If you tend to have a soft voice, you can pull the mic towards you, but it's better not to move the bass around. And then the next thing I wanted to move on to is just, I was going to give you a little detailed list of which communities had been opting up to deep green in the last few months. And I'm really grateful that we have one of our partners here from the Environmental Forum of Marin to provide us with that update. But just to make sure everyone's on the same page, we've got members of our community that have already chosen deep green a long time ago: Fairfax, San Anselmo, Belvedere, and Sausalito. Big thanks to you all for leading the way. We have some new members to the deep green category just within the last few months due to our combined efforts working with the Environmental Forum of Marin and our good staff here, including JR and Jenna and others who are out in the community frequently. Corte Madera, Larkspur, and Novato have decided to opt up to deep green, which sets a great example for their community members. And then agendized, we have County of Marin, Mill Valley, San Rafael, Ross, and Napa County all have this on the agenda to potentially opt up to deep green. So this is a great way to set an example for your residents and businesses to also opt up to deep green, get 100% renewable energy, and best of all, get 100% carbon-free energy. So very, very exciting opportunity. And thanks to all of you that are helping to spread the word about that. The next item I wanted to report on is that MCE has been selected by the California Energy Commission to receive a $1.75 million grant for distributed energy resources research and demonstration projects. The thing that I think is most exciting about this grant is that among all the applicants, MCE's application was rated at the very top among all applicants. So I think that speaks well to our staff. Paul is here from our staff team that helped pull together the application. I think it also speaks well of our partners who helped to pull together a lot of the drafting. So I think we're in good shape for a great project, and we're going to spend a little bit more time this evening, talking about a budget adjustment to accommodate this grant, and then in our executive committee meeting, we're going to talk even more about some of the detail of how this grant will unfold and what sorts of projects will be included in the grant. The next item I wanted to report on is some updates on some of the activity in Contra Costa County, where, as many of you know, we have an open inclusion period for new communities to consider joining MCE. So in the last month, we've had a lot of activity. Our inclusion period, as you may recall, we established it at our retreat last fall. It began on December 1, and it ends at the end of June. So we're kind of getting to the point where a lot of communities are taking action. Contra Costa County, unincorporated county, has taken action to request membership in MCE. And then also the communities of Moraga, Danville, Oakley, Pinole, and Pittsburgh have also taken action to request membership. Next week, the communities of Concord, San Ramon, and Antioch may take action, and then the city of Martinez may also be considering action on June 6th. And that's what we expect to see for the balance of this inclusion period. It's worth noting that the internal committees for the cities of Concord and Antioch have recommended membership in MCE, so we anticipate them moving in that direction. I wanted to offer big thanks to Director Tatson, Wilk, and Vice Chair Butt for making themselves available to answer questions and discuss their experiences being on the MCE board as these new councils go through their decision-making process. It's been really invaluable to have you all's participation, so thank you. As usual, an economic analysis will be conducted as the inclusion period comes to a close in June. And then we'll be coming back to you all in the summer to discuss the results of that economic study and then potentially take action on adding the new communities in Contra Costa County. Also, I wanted to announce that this Tuesday of this week, the city of San Jose has just announced that they're going to be launching a CCA program and they had a unanimous vote, which is really something because they have a very big council. They're not like a typical city. I think they have about 20 council members. They announced that they are the largest city in California to adopt a CCA program with a population of over 1 million. So that's exciting news. I even heard it on KQED a couple times, so it's definitely hitting the headlines there. And then the last thing I have is just a few updates on committee activity. I wanted folks to know that the audit committee met this week. That was coordinated by David McNeil, and they kicked off the 2017 financial audit process, and that's moving along on schedule. Thanks to those of you that are participating in that committee. Our technical committee will meet again on June 1st, 9 a.m., and they're going to talk about 3 things. All of you will get the packet, so you can take a look if you're welcome to participate if you'd like. We will talk about procurement planning for the potential new communities. We're also going to be talking about some adjustments to our feed-in tariff and local development programs. And we'll be talking about non-bypassable charges for CCA customers, like the PCIA and other things that we'll hear a little bit more about tonight. Our executive committee will meet on June 2nd at noon. And there we're going to discuss our extensive Deep Green campaign that's having a tremendous success and the new marketing campaign that we're about to launch to get more customers to opt up, which I think will be a nice segue from the leadership that the councils are showing, kind of transitioning to the community members to take a lot of action. Also at XCOM on June 2nd, we'll be talking about the California Energy Commission grant that we received. Last of all, the Ad Hoc Contracts Committee will begin meeting in March and will likely have a more rigorous schedule than in the past with meeting no more than monthly, but it could be as often as monthly to talk about procurement activity for any future communities that may be joining. Yeah?
Record.
March.
Further than that.
Thank you very much. I was thinking May, but you're right. I think it is starting in June. Very good. Thank you. All right. Great. going to be doing that sooner. And the last thing is we're still pinning down a location and a date for our fall board retreat. It'll probably be in the September timeframe, but we should have that too soon so you can hold the time on your calendar. And that's it for my report.
Thank you, Dawn. Any questions or comments on the Executive Director's report from board members? All right, seeing none. Next on our agenda is our consent calendar. There's 5 items on consent. The meeting minutes from the March 16th board meeting, approved contracts update, a first agreement with free-range videographers, a first amendment to the first agreement with the Energy Alliance Association, and a proposed amendment. Yes.
I move the consent.
Brad moved consent. Do I have a
I'll
second? All in favor? Aye. Any abstentions? Any opposition? All right, abstention from Director Schwartzman. All right, very good, thank you. Moving on to item 5 on our agenda, this is the fiscal year 2017-18 budget amendment. David.
Hey, thank you, everyone. As Dawn mentioned, MCE was awarded a grant by the California Energy Commission. The grant was approved by your application was approved by your executive committee in March, and in April, the grant was awarded by the CEC. This month, we're coming to the board with a proposal to amend the fiscal 2017-2018 operating fund budget to provide budget authorization to proceed with this grant process. At the executive committee meeting in June, the agreement with the California Energy Commission will be presented. And then following that, later in the summer, there will be contracts with the subcontractors who will be presented to the executive committees once those contracts come into place. So the purpose, we do not have an agreement yet with the California Energy Commission or those subcontractors. And the purpose of this amendment tonight is just to provide the budget authorization to enable those agreements at a later stage. So the grant has a number of purposes, which are detailed in the board pack. I'll just cover those briefly. First of all, it's to establish a climate action goal baseline and success metrics around that baseline as it relates to distributed energy resources. This is energy efficiency, distributed generation, storage, and grid optimization are some of the ideas that are going to be included in that. To create a database of essentially buildings and opportunities to bring about distributed energy resources within our service territory, and to use that database in order to target particular locations, particular building owners for those measures. The grant will also enable us to complete 3 demonstration projects, which will really prove out the concept. And as I understand it, the folks who have already been agreed to enter into these demonstration projects with us. So that's great news. And once the database is created and the model has been validated through these demonstration projects, the model will then be able to be used by CCAs and other organizations across California. So this is, again, something that we're really piloting and pioneering here at MCE that will hopefully serve as an example and a tool for use across the state. And last of all, we're going to create a program manual that will instruct others on how to use this particular project and tool. So the fiscal impact, it's a multi-year funding agreement. The total is $1.72 million, and that's going to hit in 3 different fiscal years for MCE. So we're just looking for authorization for the fiscal 2017-2018 period. But as you'll see in your board pack, I've provided some detail about how these revenues and expenses are expected to fall in subsequent years. On the big screen, I have a mouse, you will see the requests that we're making this evening. Oh, thank you. Other services includes consulting fees with third parties, and there's a proposal for an additional $296,000 in fiscal 2017-18. Local pilot programs, that references the pilot programs that I mentioned earlier, an increase of $193,000. And offsetting those increases, which are outflows for the organization, is going to be an inflow of grant income of $573,000. And the difference between those two numbers represents an increase in our net position. MCE is going to undertake administrative services to facilitate this grant in the amount of $84,000. But we're not anticipating any incremental expenses. So that $84,000 that we'll charge to the CEC will be compensated for, and that'll just drop straight down to the bottom line. Are there any questions?
This is an exciting grant, and I'm assuming that we will learn more about the 3 demonstration projects once you come back with actual agreements that we would need to enter into to make the project.
That's correct.
We're expecting that to come back to the board when? Do we
the grant agreement between MCE and the CEC will come to the executive committee at its June board meeting, and that'll include a scope of work that includes some of the details that you're referring to. We really get into the meat of it when we do contracts with third parties and we define the scope of work in those third-party contracts.
We're not sure when we may be in a position to do that, or the third parties will be in a position to do that with us.
We expect to have the contracts completed in a kickoff meeting with the subcontractors in early fall. So I think that contracting process is going to take place over the summer and maybe into September.
Fantastic.
Questions, comments? David, I understand what you're saying about the 84,000, but I just want to make sure that we're not, that by reporting it this way, we're not violating any terms of the grant. That, I understand we're not going to increase our cost to administer the grant, but do we have to show that it's going towards staff as part of the grant reporting, and therefore by showing it this way as a change in net position, we potentially are jeopardizing the grant?
Thank you for raising that. We have a kickoff meeting planned with the CEC to discuss these types of issues, but I'm not aware of this budget amendment compromising our grant application.
And I'll just add that it's a little bit different than a reimbursable grant, which is what we're used to, where we get the money after the fact. In this case, we get the money before we need to spend it. So it's really more of a timing issue. And our understanding is that this won't create any problems for the CEC, but we will confirm that. That's a good question.
There's a prohibition against in the grant agreement against profit. We're a nonprofit organization, so these are not profits for MCE.
Questions from the board?
Do you anticipate for the 3 subsequent years that the cost to us for doing this is going to be the same?
I think we're going to get more. We're going to get more detail once we enter into the contracts with the third parties about the timing of the entire project timeline and the timing that the expenditures will be made. So if your question is it going to be in equal portions in each year? I'm not really sure because those contracts haven't been made or agreed to yet.
So we'll see.
We'll see.
Okay.
And even this, I'm providing a budget authorization, and the contracts will follow even for this period as well.
Comments from the public on this item? We're so excited about this grant, we want to have a lot of information that's not available yet. So this really is step one, and as I understand it, what you need is a motion from one of our board members to authorize MCE to receive and expend funds pursuant to the pending
Second.
CC.
To move that.
Did you get a motion and a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposition? That's approved. All righty. Onwards to item 6 on our agenda, which is the MCE greenhouse gas emissions analysis for 2015. Kirby, it's your wheelhouse here.
All right. I think we have hopefully this is on and you can hear me okay. We've got a slide deck here, and I also have some color commentary coming your way from J.R. Killigrew, who's been helping me out with this, and in fact probably more knowledgeable than me on this topic. So maybe I'll just step down and let him do it. Anyway, in any case, so the topic for a conversation tonight, and what you'll also see in the related staff report as well as the 2 attachments, is a discussion of MCE's 2015. So not exactly the most current information, but it's the most current available information in terms of the emission factor comparison between MCE's power supply portfolio and that of PG&E. If you recall, this item's been discussed in the past, so this is kind of a recurring subject that we bring up about this time of year every year, and I think we have for about the last 5 years, and talked about the manner in which our emission factor, a very important benchmark for this organization, how it compares with PG&E. And unfortunately, there's a bit of a lag in this information. So back in February, mid-February, as a matter of fact, we received information regarding PG&E's 2015 emission factor, so that's why we're bringing this comparison to you now. And what is an emission factor? I think we've got a new board member and probably some other folks that weren't around last year when we talked about this. But an emission factor is a commonly used metric within the electric utility industry that essentially expresses the proportionate use of fuel sources within a particular supply portfolio and the manner in which that translates into relative emissions for that particular supply portfolio. You can imagine, and it's pretty intuitive here, in the event that you use power resources that produce CO2 during the combustion of fossil fuels, for example, your emission factor goes up. To the extent that you use fuel sources that are renewable or non-GHG emitting, your emission factor goes down. And in an organization like this, we are trying to achieve the lowest possible emission factor as a result of the use of a very high level of renewable energy and, of course, other carbon-free sources, namely hydroelectric power. We calculate our emission factors using the methodology that aligns with the Climate Registry, which is really, I think it's an internationally recognized organization that really creates standards focused on CO2 emissions. And we use the methodologies that are employed by this organization to calculate our own emission factors. It's probably worth pointing out that in the not too distant future, we'll be transitioning to a new methodology as a result of AB 1110, which became law not too long ago and now is in the process of implementation. So stay tuned for more changes in this regard. It's also worth noting that to the extent we own an environmental attribute associated with our supply portfolio, and in particular, this would be an instrument like a renewable energy certificate, we count that in determining our emission factor. So if we own the environmental attribute, we count that when calculating our emission factor. Here we've got a recap of our 2015 supply portfolio at a very high level. So all of our renewable energy purchases, which are typically broken out in the power content label that customers receive by fuel source, so sources like solar and wind, et cetera, are aggregated up here to just a generic renewable energy category. You can see zero carbon as a line item. In this case, zero carbon all relates to large hydroelectric purchases that were made during 2015. And then 2015 also marked kind of a bit of a change for MCE because we realized that by buying electric power from a newer, more efficient natural gas generator, we could actually do better than the emission factor that was assigned for generic unspecified purchases to the tune of about, I want to say, 15-ish%. So it's a very significant difference, and that's largely due to the fact that a lot of these newer, more efficient generators have systems in place to really drive down emissions to the lowest possible level. So you can see here we do have some natural gas purchases. Those were made through a transaction with Calpine from the Delta Energy Center, which isn't too far away. And then the balance of the portfolio was rounded out with system power purchases. So just to kind of recap, system power purchases are purchases made from the market at large. There's no specific relationship between a generator and the buyer, and that's what you see here. This is very common. Every utility supply portfolio, I think with no or very few exceptions, is going to have a certain element of their resource mix that's comprised of system power. So you can see, reflecting back on 2015, we were over 64% GHG free, so a very high portion of GHG free resources. And the footnotes here, if you bother to read those, simply indicate that while all of our renewable energy purchases were RPS eligible, meaning that the resources producing that power We're certified by the California Energy Commission to participate in the Renewable Portfolio Standard Program. We weren't able to count all of those in our Renewable Portfolio Standard Report because certain of those volumes are being used to serve deep green customers and leave it to the electric utility industry to come up with goofy rules. But you can't include those volumes, those voluntary purchases for deep green customers, which happens to be a Greenie Energy certified product, and per Greenie rules, you can't include those in your RPS report. That's what the footnote says, more or less. So how does that power content translate into an emission factor computation? And you can see here how the proportionate use of different fuel sources kind of moves across in the different columns, building to the volume of carbon that was produced by particular resource categories, and then ultimately down at the bottom here, the different emission rates. And of course, those are expressed in both metric tons of CO2 equivalent per megawatt hour, and then also in pounds of CO2 equivalent per megawatt hour. And I think when JR gets up here, he can probably provide a little bit of color commentary on what that means exactly. But I think really the punchline here, and what's going to be most interesting for this group, is the trajectory over time of MCE's emission factor. And you can see, reflecting back to 2010, and I think I've made these comments a few times before, so hopefully this isn't too repetitive, but in 2010, that was the year in which MCE launched. Very small load, very small group of customers, relatively speaking. We had a very sizable purchase of hydroelectric power in 2010, which contributed to an extremely low emission factor. Thereafter, I would say our resource mix kind of stabilized a bit, and you can see a bit of a downward trajectory, which is very positive, that's occurring over time. And so focusing on 2015 for a minute, you can see that MCE's light green emission factor of 331 pounds of CO2 equivalent per megawatt hour bested PG&E by about 18%. PG&E, of course, reflected an emission factor of 405 pounds of CO2 equivalent per megawatt hour. Looking ahead over the horizon, which is really not so much over the horizon because it's behind us, but we're working on this now, is computing our 2016 power statistics inclusive of the emission factor, and we're looking to a sub 300 metric, which is really great, and that reflects the delivery of about 70% GHG-free resources in 2016, and I expect that those statistics will all be wrapped up within the next day or two, so more to come on that one. But in any case, I think it's a really good story, and it continues to trend downward over time, and I think as we move forward to 2017 and beyond, we've adopted an integrated resource plan that reflects further reductions beyond what we've seen here. So I think we've got one other slide, and I'll have JR present that one.
Quick question on this slide.
Yes, please.
On this slide, there are three items in the legend, but the bars, there's only two colors in the bars.
Yeah, that's a very good observation, and oddly enough, I think you'll like the explanation.
Visual acuity there.
The explanation, I think, is a positive one, and as you can see, the item that isn't so clear in the bar charts is the deep green emission factor, and that's because it coincides with the horizontal axis. It's 0. So that's kind of a Excel peculiarity that I didn't bother to fix when I prepared this chart. So hopefully that's good news.
Can I ask a question also? The reason that the spread between what we're doing in PG&E projected for 2016 has gotten so small, is that primarily because they benefit because of their hydroelectric?
Yeah, another good
which is not considered renewable, but does help them in this particular measurement.
Yeah, that's absolutely the case, and there are a number of factors that I think are going to become increasingly relevant in this comparison over time. One of them, as you pointed out, is PG&E's hydroelectric system, and to the extent that there's a big hydro year, kind of the tail end of 2016, and then of course 2017, was just a phenomenal hydro year, and so we can expect that will push down PG&E's emission rate as a result of those higher than expected hydroelectric deliveries. The other piece of the puzzle, which is kind of interesting to consider, is that as more and more CCA programs form throughout the state, those customers, of course, leave PG&E service and go with whatever CCA has been formed in their jurisdiction. And that has the effect of changing the denominator in PG&E's calculation. So you basically have retail sales as a key part of this particular calculation. So that's the, talking about pounds of CO2 per megawatt hour. Well, when the megawatt hours, and the relationship between the CO2 and the megawatt hours is changing, and PG&E has less and less sales, but the same amount of hydroelectricity and the same amount of renewable energy, we're really, I think, from a practical perspective, the formation of CCAs is having the effect of really cleaning PG&E's supply portfolio. And so that's really something that's going to be particularly important as we move into the current year and really finish this year out, perform the power supply statistic calculations for 2017. You're going to see that become very relevant. High hydro, much lower load, renewables that really won't change that much. PG&E is probably going to have a very low emission factor.
Yeah, great.
Following up on Director Butt's question, why are you using both? Why are you comparing to light and deep when not just MCEs, which would be 323 as opposed to 331, and it would show a larger disparity between MCE as a whole versus light green? So why split it out to light and deep and compare that way where deep is 0 and it artificially drives the light green up? I mean, the title of the chart is MCE and PG&E emission factor comparison. So why not combine the emission factors?
Yeah, we certainly could, and I think if we took that approach, it might, say, tie out more cleanly to some of the other reporting obligations that we have out there, like the RPS, which just deal with an aggregate retail sales volume as opposed to parsing out the different retail service offerings that MCE has. But I think for the sake of transparency, that's why we've broken it out this way so far. Of course, as you observe, the aggregate, the composite of MCE's supply portfolio does in fact have a slightly lower emission rate than the light green does alone, and I think that's reasonable to assume. But for the sake of making sure that customers know how their product that they're receiving compares to the PG&E offering, that's why we broke it out this way. Again, at the end of the day, I think this organization's done a wonderful job of being as transparent as it possibly can, and this is just, I think, kind of sticking with that theme.
So I want to ask Director Tatson and Director Wilk if you have any questions or comments. And I know I was moving pretty quickly previously, and that's a challenge remotely, but I wanted to give you an opportunity if you had any questions for Kirby at this point.
I don't have any, nor do I. Thank you for asking.
Okey-doke, thanks.
So I'll go ahead and move on to the next slide if that's all right. And JR, you want to comment on that one real quickly? I guess I think maybe as part of this, if you just don't mind touching on.
Sure. Hi, folks. I'm J.R. Killigrew. I'm a community development manager on the public affairs team. The exciting part about working with Kirby around kind of calculating the impact is hopefully being able to tell that story on the impact that MCE has had on electricity emissions. So with the latest emission factor, we've been able to effectively reduce another 63,000 plus metric tons in 2015. So collectively, if you take from 2010 up through 2015, we're looking at over 185,000 metric ton reduction, again, collectively over the course of 5 years. The importance of this is helping to kind of fuel the emissions reductions for each of your community's climate action plans. And to Director Lyman, the question about the light green, deep green, whenever a city does an inventory update, they're always looking at just the light green emission factor as opposed to an aggregated one. We usually sparse out the kilowatt hour data from deep green and light green and then show the avoided emissions from the deep green participation and then attribute the actual emissions to the light green participation so they can actually be able to track and monitor the progress and be able to communicate to the public hey, we've had 2 or 3, 4% participation in deep green. Here are the avoided emissions that have come from this action. And then back a little bit. So again, it's amazing. I mean, it's a huge jump. I think we were at about 122,000 as of 2014. So we've had a 50% jump. So I think the nice thing to take away about this is I think that's the equivalent of taking over 46,000 cars off the road in 1 year. I think that's the number, give or take. So again, and then we could also find some other good talking points for you folks in terms of, you know, acres of forest saved or sequestration. The interesting thing about the emission factor is that PG&E attributes just pounds per CO2. They've decided not to include methane and nitrous oxide, which are the 2 other greenhouse gases that are related to electricity emissions. We're reporting ours as CO2e because when you look at the emissions profile, the majority of our emissions come from system power, which CARB has produced a CO2e and emission factor. We've actually spent a lot of time emailing and making calls to try to figure out if we can unpack what that looks like underneath, and to this moment, we haven't been able to. But for the sake of our reporting, we're doing it as CO2e. But when any city or county goes to do their climate action plan, all the protocols ask them to call out CO2, CH4, and N2O, and then ultimately roll it into CO2e. So we're covering all our bases, not only from our reporting standpoint, but then for each community when they do their climate action plan to be in compliance with not only the community protocol, but now this global reporting protocol, which is a whole nother story. But so yeah, again, really exciting news, and hopefully with more deep green participation and more communities joining MCE, this number just is going to keep going up, and emissions keep going down and down. So thank you very much.
That CO2e, E stands for equivalent, so it's the equivalent CO2 measure for things like methane.
And I think just to kind of maybe wrap it all up here, and I guess I'll just make another plug for Deep Green. 2016 will be kind of a neat transition for MCE in terms of Deep Green service, and this may have been talked about on various occasions by members of the PA team and other MCE staff, but 2016 will mark the first year that all Deep Green supply will be sourced from bundled California-based resources. So it's kind of I think it's a very high-quality product. So anyway, that's all I had. Happy to answer any more questions. Oh, and by the way, so the action, I think, before you tonight, before I forget, is to approve the use of the Understanding MCE's GHG emission factor document, as well as the certification template, and allow the posting of that information on the website. You may be aware that certain MCE customers are also members of the climate registry individually and have reporting obligations of their own. And so that certification template is something that they include with the various materials they submit to substantiate the emission factor that they're reporting to the climate registry. So that's why that's important. The other is mostly just explanatory in terms of how it is that we came up with these numbers.
Thank you, Kirby.
I have a follow-up question, Kirby. The reporting protocol that JR described, that's more specific, more particular, and more rigorous than the one that PG&E has adopted to follow. Is that a fair interpretation of what you guys have said?
Yeah, so essentially, I think just to hit it on the head would be to say that the use of the CO2 equivalent metric is a more conservative metric in the sense that it basically inflates the CO2 that's being reflected in our calculation by virtue of the fact that we're incorporating the impacts of methane and other GHG emissions in that particular calculation. Whereas if we were to strip those out, the CO2 kind of alone singular metric would be lower. Is that okay?
JR.
This is Don Tess, and I had a quick question about that last slide.
Go ahead, Don.
So when it talks about historical emission reductions, my question is historical emission reductions compared to what?
Great question, thank you. So this is comparing to if all our customers stayed with PG&E. So what we do is we mirror PG&E's emission factor and show the reduction compared to that. So this is quote unquote avoided emissions from enrolling in MCE if the folks had stayed with PG&E. That's the variation.
And then in each year, like in 2015, is it assuming that PG&E was better than they were in 2014?
Yes, correct. So it mirrors the PG&E calculations mirror their emission factors compared to ours. So it's basically the gap between if folks enrolled with MCE versus if they just stayed with PG&E.
Okay, thank you.
And then one final note about Director Green. So when like San Anselmo does its inventory updates and its climate action plans, the protocols that I unfortunately had the privilege of half writing, they ask to stand CO2, carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide for electricity emissions. So San Anselmo goes and gets the emission factor from us, but then goes to the EPA eGrid to get CH4 and N2O. And then that wraps up their electricity emission factor that is protocol compliant. So it's a little bit even more rigorous in terms of almost double counting for it in that sense.
Right, that's what it sounded like. And then I have one other question, which is, isn't the overall impact of what MCE has been doing in terms of leading the way and reducing emission factors is by competition also forcing a response in the same direction from PG&E?
Yes.
So that's great.
It's amazing.
Yeah, it's really good.
Barbara.
So Barbara Kohler, Fairfax, just a quick question. I think it's great that we're being conservative. I'm wondering, since methane is 18 to 24 times as potent as CO2, would it be a good idea for us on this graph to also depict, what it would be minus the methane, or just showing what the methane component is, so we can have a straight comparison with PG&E, because that's a big deal.
Yes.
I mean, that's a huge multiplier.
Yeah, so I think this is where we kind of get into some muddy waters, because PG&E's using the same system power emission factor, which is wrapped up into CO2e, but they're just reporting it as carbon dioxide. They're not reporting it as CO2e, so they're just having their standalone emission factor. And as I mentioned, we've tried to...
We can't sort it out.
Yeah. We've tried to talk to... we will continue to reach out to CARB in terms of engaging them to get some more information. But again, as system power is completely nebulous, we don't know the source of it. We'll never know how much of it is natural gas or any other carbon emitting source. So unfortunately, we're kind of stuck.
That's okay.
Doing the best we can.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I think it's probably worth pointing out that, I find it unlikely that CARB will update that number or split it apart in the coming years, because once we get to AB 1110 implementation, they're going to have to come up with new metrics anyway. So, I think that's right around the corner, but for the next couple of years, we'll probably just have to use what we've got, and I expect that'll remain, kind of the status quo until then.
Who would have thought emission factors were so much fun?
I just had kind of a nerdy question, actually. We were having a little sidebar here. Nitrous oxide is counted as a greenhouse gas, but other oxides of nitrogen actually aren't, right? Can you explain the difference?
So in terms of what, at least for electricity suppliers, and then, my hat as a climate action planning practitioner, there are theoretically 6 greenhouse gases you should track in a climate action plan and a greenhouse gas inventory. That's carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and then FSC, PFCs, and then also sulfur hexafluoride. Those are the 6 main ones. Any of other kind of criterion air pollutants have kind of fell out of, I hate to use the word style, but they're no longer tracked in municipal or community inventories. So in terms of what electricity emissions are tracking, it's theoretically nitrous oxide, methane, and the carbon.
So nitrous oxide can be separately tracked from the other oxides of nitrogen. So like NOx is a criteria pollutant.
Yeah.
But it's actually can be helpful in its own weird way in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, because it does have a beneficial impact on methane.
But just in terms of this practice, it's just nitrous oxide.
So it can be.
Yes.
Kirby, Yeah, actually, I think I can, actually.
We will.
Because this is going to be really...
I think I got the prize on that.
You're going to give me the prize, but this is
Yeah.
really minutia. I'm gonna dive into that very small minutia. Kirby, thank you very much for all the work you do for us, not only just on tonight's presentation, but everything you do. But in looking at attachment B, the second page of attachment B, where there's any questions, the previously noted emissions or related calculations should be directed to Kirby at pacificea.com. And I'm wondering if you have an MCE email that we can use.
Oh, there you go. That is down in the weeds. I don't, but you can certainly probably do a more generic MCE one.
We could take that up with the executive director. Yeah.
Or you could just put JR's email address.
It's not the best you got.
Yeah, it's the best I got tonight.
A win.
Any other questions or comments from directors? Director Tetz and Director Wilk, I want to give you another opportunity to weigh in if you choose to before we take a vote.
We're okay over here, thanks.
Good, okay, all right. Okay, any comment from the public on this item? Seeing none, I'm open to someone making a motion.
I'll move the staff recommendations 1 and 2 in item 6.
Okay. In favor?
Yes.
Aye. The opposition? Right, that's
Aye from the East Bay contingent.
Thank you very much. Good job. Excellent. We'll get this straightened out. All right. Thank you very much, Kirby and JR. So moving on to item 7 on our agenda, which is a draft resolution to revise the net energy metering tariff and proposed amendments to local SOL and NEM electric schedules. Justin, good evening.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to speak before the board again. I'm Justin Kudo, Manager of Account Services here at MCE, and I'm here today to talk about 2 proposed amendments to both the local SOL and the NEM tariffs. MCE was proud to recently cut the ribbon on our new local SOL project at the Cooley Quarry, which will imminently supply 100% renewable electricity option to our customers who participate in it. Local SOL is billed as a pass-through of our feed-in tariff. It's a higher rate that encourages local development of renewable energy projects. As part of our billing implementation of the program, staff has examined interactions between local SOL program and some of the other programs that we offer. One of those programs is, of course, net energy metering, which is the billing mechanism that's used to credit people with self-generated renewable energy for the excess power that they produce, so they can use it to pay for usage that happens when their on-site solar or wind is not producing electricity. MCE currently serves approximately 10,000 customers who use net energy metering, or NEM, and that represents about 4% of our customer base. MCE's NEM program offers a couple of distinct perks over most NEM programs. When customers generate surplus electricity through MCE's NEM program, if they are a light green customer, we actually credit them at the higher deep green rate as a bonus. However, local SOL already offers a rate that exceeds deep green, and therefore the amendments that are proposed would clarify that customers who are participating in both local SOL and NEM would receive the local SOL rate, the higher local SOL rate, when they generate excess electricity. Another aspect of our NEM program is that customers with excess production exceeding $100 are eligible for a cash out once annually during the month of May, and they receive a credit for that surplus production at its billed value. Most NEM customers only cover a portion of the electricity they use on site. Many customers only generate enough to reduce their net consumption down to minimal levels, thus enabling them to evade penalties that PG&E might assess for high-tier usage. You also will see some customers who generate perhaps 60 or 70% of their electricity, but they take advantage of favorable time of use rates that allow them to zero out their bills. However, many of our customers have a variety of usage somewhere in between. In some rare cases, customers can generate more electricity than they can use on site. This is pretty unusual because PG&E doesn't typically allow for interconnection of oversized solar arrays, Nevertheless, we do see it happen on occasion. Staff is concerned that utilizing both the local SOL program and the NEM program would allow customers to effectively cash out their surplus credits at the feed-in tariff rate without transferring any of the environmental attributes over to MCE. Because of that, they would not be able to be included within MCE's energy portfolio. It could be a roundabout way to receive the feed-in tariff incentives without actually participating in the feed-in tariff. Therefore, staff's proposing to address this issue by making local SOL customers ineligible for NEM cash out. The customers would still be entitled to roll over any of their excess credits in perpetuity to offset future usage charges. Are there any questions from the board?
Yes, would you explain the reasoning for disallowing the cash out attribute for the SOL customers? Would you explain that again?
Yes. In some cases, customers will have an oversized solar array installed. We do allow for cash outs if people happen to have an overage of production, but the local SOL rate is substantially higher than our basic rate. If customers were signed up for, if a customer knew they were going to always overproduce, it would make sense for them to financially sign up for the local SOL rate just so that they could be able to sell that electricity back at a much higher rate than they otherwise would.
And so the idea is that because of that advantage, not to give them the cash out opportunity? Is that the
right? We still want to make sure that they're able to keep all of their credits. We want to make sure that the maximum amount of people eligible to who are interested in participating in local SOL can participate in it. But we don't want to have any unintended negative consequences to other ratepayers, to people within MCE service and people who are on local SOL. We think this is an unlikely situation. There aren't a lot of customers who, on a kilowatt hour basis, local SOL is not a time of use rate, on a kilowatt hour basis who have net overall negative kilowatt hour usage. We've only identified one customer on the wait list right now who would be at all impacted by this, and we do plan on reaching out to them to make sure that they're aware of this change should it be approved by the board.
Staff report, in one part of it says resolution not required. And then down at the bottom it says recommendation, approved draft resolution number, blah, blah, blah. So I'm sure there's an explanation for that.
There is. So we do need to approve we are recommending adjustments to the local SOL tariff and the net energy metering tariff. The net energy metering tariff has previously been adjusted by resolution, and as a result, our legal team felt that it would be prudent to make this adjustment by resolution to our net energy metering tariff. However, that's not a requirement for the local SOL tariff. So the resolution is only referencing the net energy metering tariff, and that's why there's a discrepancy there.
Board Directors Tatson or Wilk, do you have any comments or questions? I'll take that.
Nothing over here, thanks.
Okay, great, thank you. Any public comment on this item? All right, seeing none, would someone like to make an appropriate motion?
I'll move that we approve draft resolution number 2017-03 and authorize staff to make the proposed amendments to the local SOL net energy metering electric schedules.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Yep.
Aye
An aye from the remote directors too. Thank you. All right. So we're now moving on to another resolution, agenda item number 8, which is a resolution authorizing entry into and execution of certain contracts relating to the MCE Solar One project.
And I'm going to cover this item because we have spent many hours at many meetings talking about MCE local SOL, and this is really just a standard, this should be a very brief item. I'm happy to answer questions about it, but the quick overview is that we have been working for many years on getting the MCE Solar One project underway, fully financed with our team of finance partners and folks involved in the construction. And there's one standard item that is has been determined to be needed here at the end before the close of the financial documents, and that is this resolution authorizing entry into and execution of contracts relating to the MCE Solar One project. So this is just further assurance of action that the board already took in a previous meeting. If there are any questions about MCE Solar One, I'm happy to answer them.
And Kevin, any questions on your end?
No.
Public comment on this.
I'd like to move that we approve resolution 2017-04, authorizing entry into and execution of certain contracts relating to the MCE Solar One project.
Second that.
In favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposition?
Aye.
That's approved. Great, thank you. Alrighty, so moving on to an update on the Community Power Coalition. Looks like we have a really colorful PowerPoint presentation ahead.
Great, and I have one comment as she's coming up that if directors can identify themselves when they begin to speak, that will help our remote participants know who is speaking.
The last two motions have been made by Sloan Bailey from Corte Madera.
Seconded by Kevin Haroff from Larkspur.
Thanks for the reminder, Don. We've all gotten a little lazy.
I've got the mouse of power. Good evening, directors. As some of you know, my name is Alexandra McGee. I am the Community Power Organizer here at MCE. My position actually started as a grant-funded position through the San Francisco Foundation to focus on issues of equity and social justice within the community choice space. And so while I now am a community development manager, I've continued with that work. So I'm pleased today to present to you a little bit of the work that I do with our Community Power Coalition. I included some background information for those of you who aren't as familiar with it. The Community Power Coalition is a group of advocates, both grassroots and more institutional, that work in areas of sustainability and conservation, social justice, environmental justice from a diversity of communities that we serve. So as you'll see up here, we formed in 2014 to discuss issues that the community was interested in discussing. Solar One actually was one of those issues. Thanks, Justine. So largely, when I inherited this group, when I started here at MCE, this coalition was made up primarily of social justice and environmental justice advocates in the East Bay, primarily Richmond and San Pablo. So the focus was really on equity and on our low-income communities. And so the mission statement that we derived in 2014, it continues to be our mission today, is pretty much to accelerate and expand access to renewable energy and energy efficiency. It's just to make sure that people know about MCE and that we're as involved in the community as we can be and as effective in reaching their needs and addressing their needs as we can. I'll go through this through my presentation, but that includes sustainable workforce development and a just transition to a cleaner energy economy. And now that we have the wonderful strategic plan, we have particular actions that are dedicated to making MCE inclusive of all our diverse community members. Last year, we had a survey among the coalition members, and I'll mention them in a moment, but these 3 items were ranked from most to least, ascending to descending order of most priority. So energy efficiency ranked number 1. For our low-income communities in particular, let's bring those electric bills down. That includes solar rebates, our low-income solar rebates. And then related to that, how else can we bring electricity costs down? Your board does so by voting on generation rate reductions, and also by all the work that we do with the power charge and difference adjustment, challenging the exit fees. And third, the development of local renewable energy generation, both as a tool for resiliency in our communities as well as a job creator to develop more of those green-collar jobs. So, meet the coalition. These were the original members when I started. As I said, mostly East Bay focused. APEN Grid, you probably recognize some of those. And in the last year, we've been really working to expand it to be more inclusive of the voices in Marin as well as in Napa. So what you see up here are the members that meet most frequently to talk about issues regarding community choice and inviting us out to their meetings. We also invite staff from your cities so they can also have a space to kind of get a quick update every other month of what's happening at MCE, what kind of programs are becoming available, and how can your cities take advantage of those. So ever wonder why CCA puts community before choice? Here's the cheesy part of the presentation. As you can imagine, there are multiple advantages to having a community choice program, of which I'm sure you're aware of all of them. But in terms of the social justice and equity work that I do, these became kind of the center points. So by awareness, I mean community education. So by meeting every other month, and now we meet by webinar to reduce the burden of those who have to put up with our busy roadways and rush hour traffic. So every other month we meet via webinar, so everyone can access it over lunchtime to get an update, like how CCA is up and running, what's happening in Contra Costa. We'll have a guest speaker. That last month it was Green and Healthy Homes Initiative, gave a presentation on what they're doing here in Marin. Before that was our multifamily, essentially just keeping everyone up to date. Also, two-way dialogue. I mentioned that in 2014, one of the issues was we had this proposal that we could have a wonderful, great, big project in Richmond on a remediated brownfield site, but it's going to be on Chevron property. How does the community feel about that? What kind of input should we be considering? And so over the course of a coalition meeting, we talked about a community kiosk, that the development of those jobs related to the project outweighed the marketing stigma that might be associated with a partnership on Chevron land. And then also, it's a space for cross-county collaborations, idea pollination. Oops, too far. There we go. So deep green, coordinating deep green pushes in Napa, Marin, and Contra Costa all together. What kind of partnerships can we develop? And then in terms of access, trigger finger. All right. In terms of access, community choice represents the democratization of the energy economy. Democratization means that you have public participation. Public participation means that sometimes it's messy, sometimes it's not quite exactly beautiful, but by working with us and the staff here, and special kudos to our marketing team, we can turn that into this. So this year we're celebrating El Cerrito Centennial.
If you want a sticker, I've got lots of stickers.
We've got stickers, we got banners, we have special events celebrating. Thank you, Director Lyman.
I couldn't miss the opportunity.
Celebrating their 100th birthday by encouraging people to go 100% deep green. So we have a special webpage dedicated to that. Community-specific initiatives are very exciting for me. But also access means that we are producing things in different languages. So this is me about to go on television. I went to speak with the show is called Charlando con Teresa Foster. So very bilingual. That's Teresa. She's far better dressed than I was. But so that was trying to use multilingual, but also venues. So television, radio, written word, more visual images in communities where perhaps you don't have a really high literacy rate. Our mailers come in all kinds of different languages, depending on the demographics of your community. And then we have a completely separate Spanish site that's a reflection of our English site. So it's just es.mcecleanenergy.org. And that's kept up to date. Again, kudos to our marketing team. And access also means that you're physically present. There are some pockets of communities you can't reach otherwise. So last year we attended 264 events. This year we have 116, and we're in May. So we're very engaged in the community, and we'll go wherever people invite us. Another one of those A's was the activism A. This is the colorful splash, the rabble-rousing A's. You guys probably recognize some of the people in that picture. Actually, I spent all day today in Oakland at a sustainable communities gathering. And Kiki in particular was up there and spoke of MCE's beginning, which was for my time. And it really, I already feel impassioned about the work that we do here, but being reminded of how difficult it was and how unlikely it was to actually launch is really humbling. So I'm very grateful to be in this position because of the activism of these advocates from way back when, including the PCIA last year. Here you have the Main Street Moms. And then activism can also be deep green. So we'll do deep green neighborhood house parties where everyone gets trained as to how to opt someone up. And then also showing up at your city councils, organizing people around messaging, giving them the information necessary. And then, but for example, Nevada, Corte Madera, and Larkspur just went deep green, and part of which was public pressure by these advocates. Thank you all for voting. And then obviously, because half of that premium goes towards a local development fund, it feeds the third priority point, which is the just transition to a green economy. So just some pictures. Obviously, the Charles McGlashan Advocacy Award that we give every year supports these efforts, and then thought partners. So here we have a room, MCE, Sierra Club, Communities for a Better Environment, APEN, all of us working together towards this just transition. And then lastly, to address that third bullet point, the advantages, a just transition to a sustainable economy includes the local development piece, these local projects of new solar in Richmond, new solar in Novato. Shalini, I love that picture of you. And then, of course, Solar One coming up in Richmond, and all the jobs associated, and the resiliency of having your power produced in your backyard. All of these were dreams that these advocates had before MCE launched, and I'm really proud to be able to report back to them that we're delivering. So just wanted to touch on this. I just realized the subtitle is wrong, but last year we did an energy efficiency campaign in San Pablo, specifically targeting small businesses to help them overcome the initial financial barrier of installing LEDs and better HVAC systems and refrigeration measures. We replicated that this year, and over the course of 4 days, just pound the pavement, went door to door down 23rd McDonald Avenue. We got to 85 businesses, spoke 3 languages over the course of those 4 days, and 64% did an energy audit on the spot. I'm still waiting on the numbers to hear what the adoption rate is, but because the City of Richmond provided additional funds to cover the gap costs of MCE puts in money, PG&E puts in money, but there's most times there's some additional funds that the business owner would have to pay. City of Richmond offered to cover those gap costs, and so we're expecting the adoption rate to be very high. Lastly, grid alternatives. We have a low-income solar program. We've allocated $115,000 since 2012 to that, which pretty much makes a residential solar system free of charge to someone who low-income qualifies in our service area. Coming to the end, that also extends another advantage is the NEM cash-out program that Justin was describing earlier. Last year, you may remember, it was about $1 million that our customers earned. And I think this year we're expecting a little more than that. And then all the above. The workforce development contracts we have here in Marin with MCCDC, Rising Sun, and Richmond Build are work over in the East Bay. And I'll just finish. One, as I hope you know, this is very hard work for me. Hard work and hard work. And I think that the more inclusive we are of our diverse communities, the more resilient we are, and the better, the more we represent them, the stronger we are as a CCA. And I think we meet kind of our mission by putting community first. So thank you for your time.
Fantastic. We're very happy to have you. We're lucky to have you, and that's a wonderful presentation, and I love the graphics. Are really great. Fantastic job in the community and also in designing this presentation. Thank you. Any questions, comments? Yeah, Barbara.
First of all, I want to thank you all for all your hard work. It's just been fabulous, and we've been fortunate in Fairfax that Jenna Famular and before her Allison worked with us on our deep green incentives. So we have the highest rate. Right now, we challenge everybody to get higher, and we want to get higher, but just one of the thoughts, and I should have mentioned this when the Environmental Forum folks were here, but along with municipalities on your deep green push, school districts are the next big target, along with just our residential communities. And we tried some in Fairfax, but through our Climate Action Committee. But I think if you all would be able to do some focusing, maybe with the Environmental Forum, that's the next big area that I think we can change. And I think we'll see huge, benefits of that. So thank you so much. You guys are wonderful to work with. It's just every time I've been fortunate enough to work with members of the team, everybody is so dedicated and so happy to help on their days. Well, I'm sure they get paid, but on their days off, Sundays, just some of, taking away from their personal time. So we appreciate it.
Cutting out over here.
Yep. I think we need to speak closer to the microphone, so if the light's not on,
I thought it was on when she was speaking.
it was on at the beginning.
Okay.
Oh, well, I thought it wasn't. Should I repeat that? No. Would you like me to repeat it, though, in the East Bay?
No, that's okay. Just you sound good now. Whoever was just speaking, it was must have been away from the microphone a little bit.
Okay, it's Barbara in Fairfax, so I'll make a better effort. Thank you.
Hey, Don and Kevin, did you want to chime in any way other than to make sure we're speaking more articulately?
That was a terrific presentation. Thank you. It looks like you're really getting out there in the community. It was very good. We look forward to you coming to some events in our communities.
Fantastic. Thank you. So let's move on to item 10, our policy update. Shalini, yeah.
Hi, thank you for having me. You can't actually see the light when you're speaking, so you should tell me.
You can't, so it's very challenging. Yeah.
I'm Shalini Swaroop. Nice to meet you. I am on the legal and policy team here at MCE. And we've had a lot of interesting events happen over the last month or so. So I'm here to update you, and it's all sort of tied in together. So I'll take questions at the end on any one of these slides. There's only 3 slides, so it shouldn't take that long. So at the end of April, all 3 IOUs jointly filed an application at the Public Utilities Commission to replace the power charge and difference adjustment. And as a reminder, the power charge and difference adjustment is supposed to compensate the utilities for the above-market costs of contracts they already entered into on our customers' behalf before our customers departed from IOU bundled service. So it's to ensure that bundled customers do not have to pay extra costs for contracts that were already made when CCAs or other types of departing load are launched. So according to AB 117, which was the enabling legislation for CCAs in California, the costs that are passed along have to be unavoidable and attributable to the customer. And I think that's a really important point, because a lot of times we hear from folks, why are CCAs trying to get rid of the PCIA? We're not. We're trying to ensure that the costs are unavoidable and attributable to our customers. We're trying to ensure that the costs are assigned in accordance with the statute. So part of the PCIA is that you compare the contract price for what the utility sold the contract or bought the contract for to a market price benchmark to evaluate the difference in the value or above market costs. So they're not comparing it to what they actually sold it for, they're comparing it to a market price benchmark. And that market price benchmark is approved by the Public Utilities Commission, and it reflects the energy costs. It also reflects capacity, resource adequacy, compliance credit, renewable energy credits, and other what we call ancillary services that go along with energy. So that's an important feature that we'll get to in a second. The last thing I'll say about the legislation is that 2 years ago, SB 350 was passed, which was California's latest landmark legislation getting us to 50% renewable energy by 2030. And part of SB 350 was that there should not be cost shifting between bundled and unbundled customers. And all customers have to pay the costs that are attributable to them. And so that goes for bundled customers, and that also goes for CCA customers. And that was something we negotiated for as well. So now we get to PAM. The difference between PAM and the PCIA is that they do not want to use the market value benchmarks anymore. They want to use the actual costs for when they sell the energy. And they want to sell the energy and the ancillary services into the spot market, which is where you get the lowest price. It's usually a very short-term market, and you sell them in sort of very small increments. And so that difference between the contract price they bought it at and the contract price they sell it at is going to be called the portfolio allocation charge or cost. Sorry, there's a lot of acronyms. So it's going to be called the PAC. The other part of the portfolio allocation methodology is that they're going to distribute the extra renewable energy credits and resource adequacy contracts directly to the CCAs. And it's up to the CCAs whether we want to use it or we want to sell it off. So there are a lot of problems with this proposal. The first is that, like I said, they're selling it at the lowest price for the energy they can possibly get. So guess what? That increases the price differential that our customers have to pay. Second, the utility companies do get better prices when they sell off contracts that are fully intact. You know, instead of spinning off RA services or renewable energy credits, if you sell them all intact over a long period of time, you have stability and you get a more stable price. They have not done that. And this proposal doesn't suggest that they do. In fact, it suggests the contrary. It locks them into selling it in the shortest market possible. It doesn't address any mitigation opportunities, like selling the contracts to new CCAs that are coming up. And it also undermines your local governance, right? We're already fully resourced, as you all know, with our resource adequacy and our ancillary services. We don't need extra contracts because we're already fully procured. And that's an extra cost to our customers as well. I'm going to be not terribly specific about next steps because it is a litigation strategy and we are in a public meeting. I'm happy to talk to any of you individually. I just don't want to lose our attorney-client privilege on this matter. So we are engaging with CalCCA in a joint strategy, which involves staff from every operational CCA and potentially staff from CCAs that have yet to be launched. And the thing I would just caution everyone is that applications take a really long time at the CPUC. The average, I've been working before the CPUC for about 6 years now. The average application takes about 1.5 to 2 years. So this is not going to happen overnight, and we have a lot of opportunities to weigh in on the application. The other thing I will say is that the Commission may have other ideas for how they want to approach this issue, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. So that's the portfolio allocation methodology. Next, we can talk about legislation. Oh, go ahead, Barbara.
I just wanted to ask a question. So this is probably rudimentary, but it was my understanding, looking at that the flyer that PG&E sent out, that this PAC would replace the PCIAs. That's correct, right?
That is correct.
Is there any thought that along with extra charges to CCA customers that it's the IOU's way of sort of shifting all the emphasis that's been on the PCIA and now creating a new animal that we have to sort of argue about? Because I know that CCAs and particularly MCE has spent a lot of time trying to find out more about how the PCIA is calculated. And when I saw this, I probably tend to be suspicious. I thought, oh, okay, something brand new, so we have to start all over with new arguments. And I know there's different ways to calculate it, but is there any thought there, or is it just really that they're trying to pass on additional charges, in your view?
That's a really astute observation. I think a successful part of our campaign to examine the PCIA at the Commission is that they're really tired about hearing about it. And so I think you make a very clean point that this is something shiny and new that could be the answer to everyone's problems, and that's how it's being sold to a certain extent. And especially because of the pass-through of the resource adequacy and the renewable energy certificates, people or the IOUs are selling this as the CCAs pay the cost, but they're also getting the benefits. So whether or not these are actual benefits or whether we want these benefits are never really considered.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Kevin. Oh, sorry, Ford, did you have your hand up?
I did.
Okay.
Go ahead, Kevin.
Go ahead, Ford.
All right. Ford, Green, Sand, and Soundwell. So is the basic idea of the PAM is that PG&E is seeking, and the other investor utilities are seeking CPUC authorization to basically be able to unload their contracts cheap and charge the excess to the consumer? Is that how it breaks down rudimentarily?
It's probably an oversimplification because you could say that's the truth about the PCIA right now. I would say one of the chief differences are using actual contract prices instead of the market price benchmark and the passing along of quote-unquote benefits. I think that's the key difference, but ultimately the goal is the same, is to compensate bundled customers for the cost of the contracts that unbundled customers were responsible for.
I guess really what my question is it seems like it's substituting one approach that dings the consumer for another that dings the consumer.
Yeah, that's right, and thank you. You know, what I put on this slide is that it doesn't address the underlying issues that we've raised with the PCIA, which is volatility, transparency, certainty, mitigation of damage. It doesn't address any of those concerns. It just raises a whole new host of them.
And maybe this is something we can talk about offline, but I find this very disturbing. It seems fundamentally inconsistent with the principles that underlie the PCIA charge initially, and I think we've all had problems with that overall, but at least the concepts were understandable within the framework of the legislation. It's very hard to understand how this can be articulated as within the framework of the legislation, and it seems like a real problem. And like I said, maybe this is something we can talk about offline.
I'll just say I agree, and I'd be happy to talk to you about that offline. So talking about legislation, Kevin, what a great segue to us talking about legislation. We had a great victory earlier, maybe it was a month and a half ago now, with SB 618, the Bradford bill. That was the bill that clearly delineated that the CPUC would have authority over a CCA's integrated resource plan that's submitted to them for certification. And I think we ultimately ended up neutralizing the bill with the help of many key senators in the Senate Energy Committee, in no small part to Senator McGuire, Senator Wiener, as well as Senator Skinner. So if any of you run into them somewhere, please thank them. And I think the really great thing about SB 618 was that this was the first time Cal CCA as an association was really able to flex its legislative muscle and make itself known. And honestly, if we had seen a bill like this even a year or two ago, we would have had to fight a lot harder to kill it. And I think many of you, the directors on the board that were here for AB 2145, remember that we were fighting until the very last day of the session. This was dispensed with pretty much at its first committee. And I think that's just a real testament to how much, quote unquote, power we have gained in the last few years. And so it's been really interesting to see that. Okay, there are, these are just general themes that we always look for in our analysis of legislation. And I think it's always a good reminder to the board and other folks is that we're always looking at whether legislation affects our local governance, whether it affects fair competition, and whether it affects proper cost allocation. So right now, there's a bill that doesn't affect fair competition right now, but could potentially have impacts, and that's SB 100, Some of you might have heard about this. It was announced about a week and a half ago, or maybe 2 weeks ago, by Senate Pro Tem Kevin De Leon. And it is his bill to have a 100% renewable energy standard by 2045 and to increase the current RPS to about 60% at 2030. So right now, the RPS maxes out at 50% in 2030. This would max out the RPS at 60% in 2030, and then also have an aspirational goal to get 100% RPS in 2045. So that's something that we just want to make sure that the rules are applied fairly across all load-serving entities, how contracts are being counted as zero emission carbon. That's something that we're really interested in seeing. And if folks ask you about this, our mission is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, right? So, I think as a concept, we are very supportive of it, and we still have all the great local benefits of our CCA programs, benefits like the ones Alexandra just so eloquently described. And that also includes local governance, local jobs, local benefits, so people kind of expect us to be against this bill, and we're not. We want to limit our greenhouse gas emissions. We haven't seen any bills on proper cost allocation. We might see one on the PAM later this year, and that's not, I don't have an inside source. It just seems like everybody's talking about it, so that's something we want to be prepared for if it does come down. So speaking of what's coming down, I just wanted to give you all a pretty big picture view of California's energy market right now. So the first thing we have is these really aggressive energy goals, which include SB 100. And I think part of it is that California's legislators and leaders are really fired up to lead the resistance in the age of, federal climate denial. And so part of that is that our legislators were already setting really aggressive goals, but now they're more motivated to set even more aggressive goals. And while that's great in some ways, in other ways, we don't actually functionally know how 100% RPS would work. We have issues with reliability. We have issues with the way solar comes off the grid at 5 p.m. right when people get home. So there are reliability issues that are really important to think about when we're aiming for those aggressive energy goals. The second is the retail market structure. The CPUC had an en banc an en banc is when all 5 commissioners get together. They had an en banc on CCAs in February, and tomorrow they're having another en banc on retail choice in the market and how California is transitioning, or whether California should transition to a more open retail market. I mean, the genie's kind of out of the bottle at this point. Right now, rooftop solar, CCA, and DA account for 25% of the retail load. By 2020, the CPUC estimates it could reach 85%. And so a lot of that is due to CCA. A program like LA County would take a large amount of electricity from SCE, or Energy Generation Services. So that's the climate that the CPUC and the retail market structure is looking at in terms of retail market structure, is how is the market actually structured and how can we avoid another energy crisis? And, that brings up the role of the regulators. Right now, they have a sort of command and control approach to the electricity market because, they can say, hey, IOUs, do X, procure biomass, and 80% of the state is lumped in along with that electricity generation mandate. Given that CCAs have local governance, the question is, what is the regulator's role and how is that shifting over time? And so that's when we run into issues with jurisdiction. And I think that's where we'll really need your help in advocating our cause. And the last is, how are we going to pay for it all? Let's say that we set up a goal for what the retail market structure looks like. How do we get there? How are we ensuring costs aren't stranded? How are we ensuring that bundled customers and unbundled customers are paying their fair share? And so that's sort of the larger discussion that's happening at the legislature, at the different regulatory agencies, and CCA is really a driving force in that. So I would say we are at a sort of pivotal time, and I think we actually hit the tipping point a year ago, but nobody noticed we hit the tipping point. And so now the regulators are trying to play catch up, and that's not a role that anyone relishes. So I would say I have a pretty measured approach. At MCE, we have a long history, and Don and the people up here are a testament to that we've lived through many near-death experiences. And I'm not sure I would consider this a near-death experience, especially with all of the combined advocacy power that we have now. I think it's going to be tough, and I think it's going to be hard, and we're probably not going to get everything we want. But I think we have a really good shot of not getting, killed, basically. So with that,
an upbeat ending there, Shalini.
Not getting killed is,
it's a positive.
That's when I wouldn't have said that 2 years ago, to be honest. Yeah. So I've seen progress.
Yeah. Thank you for that really thoughtful presentation, and really thank you for the extraordinary amount of work that you do. You really do a great job, and you're very vigilant. We appreciate it.
You get late night emails from me, don't you?
Yeah. I didn't say that. Kevin.
Just real quick, I just want to reiterate that and thank you for the work that you've done. And I've been very pleased to be helpful in modest ways with some of your activities. But I hope you know that this board is fully behind your efforts to promote the success of CCAs in the state of California. We really are, it's just obvious, at a transition point within the way in which retail energy markets are being served in this state. We're setting an example for the rest of the country, and it's really quite remarkable. So we are all sitting here behind you 1,000%.
And we really need your leadership. So it's a symbiotic and beneficial relationship.
Director Tatson and Director Welk, is there something nice you'd like to say about Shalini?
I'll be here all night.
A very thorough report, and I look forward to learning more and figuring out how we can help, because we have somewhat different representatives in Sacramento than you do.
Very happy to hear that.
Thank you. Director Withy?
Right with you, Sausalito. I also, want to say this has been an interesting experience watching over the last 5 years, how this is evolving. With regards to how the energy market is evolving and basically the risk and the changes that these forces are, I'm wondering whether we should have a little bit more of a deep dive into this at the strategic session we're going to have in the fall, because obviously this is something that you're telling us is forces that are definitely going to make things change. Well, if forces are going to make things change, we should be talking about it at the strategic level. So that's my
a great recommendation. Ford, were you about to say something? You looked like you were ready. Okay.
Yeah, but not.
Sloan?
Yeah.
I agree, Ray, with what you said. Sloan Bailey from Corte Madera, and Shalini, we all think you're great at what you did. I wonder if you might consider in the future including the briefest sort of bullet points so that we know what updates, what the subject matters are. It's hard for me to ask smart questions. I didn't know how to prepare, you know what I mean? Even just reference broad subject areas, the Senate bill numbers, the fact that you're talking about the cost allocation method, whatever. That would be appreciated, but thank you.
Absolutely. And the reason I didn't put bill numbers is because they're changing a lot right now. But absolutely, in terms of the PAM application, I can definitely give you a more
subject matter or just any. I mean, policy update is probably broad enough so that we could on our own, but any information would be helpful. And also, the slides weren't in our packet, were they?
No, I tried to save paper because there were 3 slides.
I think one other thing is that we are touching on topics where there's a lot of strategic information that it's not great to spend a lot of time on in a public setting, and so that's why you have a more limited version of a slide deck than we might have in a more technical presentation. But I think your point is well taken, and I think we can increase the amount of detail going forward.
Ford, are you ready now?
Yes, I am. I'm Ford Green, San Anselmo. One way that board members can do that would be to read the some or all of the regulatory packet. I did
And so I wanted to, I was really, really impressed with the quality of legal work that's being churned out at a fairly high rate by Shalini and by Michael Callahan and by CC Song. The legal writing is really clear, it's really balanced, it's precise, it's well-reasoned, and for this reader, really, really effective. And that's where a lot of the rubber meets the road, is in litigation before the CPUC. And to see having comrades in arms, having names of other regulatory counsel from other agencies contributing, and then also CalCCA, California Community Choice Association. It's just fantastic. So I wanted to acknowledge the high quality of the work, and even though it's tedious, Kevin, being a fellow nerd, would probably appreciate the regulatory packet. You probably already read it anyway. So, thank you.
Thanks for it. I'll pass that along.
Yeah, so that really, really good work.
Barbara?
Just a quick suggestion, maybe one way that in the future we could have kind of a thumbnail sketch is, I work for CAPCOA, and one of the things their legislative advocate does is put together a matrix of very brief matrix of all bills, and the last day to introduce bills is passed. So while now without term limits, bills change consistently through the end of the session, having just a general what the bill number is and just generally what it covers might be a way to help us. And then for those of us who are more interested, we can look on California Ledge Info to learn more about them or follow them more. But that might be one way. And then maybe for the CPUC thing, just part of the matrix, what the, what the proceedings are that are upcoming, just so that we would know. And I'm not talking about a lot of information, just a brief thumbnail sketch.
Sure, and we have a lot of those materials. I don't generally share them in a publicly available packet because it contains our analysis. And on some of the bills, we have positions, but we're working with the author's office in a close relationship, so it's not appropriate for me to...
I'm not talking about bill analysis. I worked
detail.
in the state. Bill analysis are all confidential. I'm not talking about that. I'm just talking about a sentence on what the bill's about, period. And then should we want to delve in more, we can read the regulatory packet, but we could also look things up on Ledge Info just to get a better feel for what the bills are.
Yeah, I think my lesson for tonight is that I should always write an executive summary report when I come speak to the board. So thank you.
Thanks, Shalini. Any other comments from the board in the room or elsewhere? Yeah.
Real quick again, Kevin Harrell from Larkspur. I just wanted to support Ray with his suggestion about addressing some of these issues in the context of our upcoming retreat. This really is an interesting time, and that fact was really brought home to me recently at the Power Association of Northern California conference that I attended and that you spoke at. There's a lot of wheels turning in this context right now, and not all of them are in our favor. And we have some distinctive challenges that I think it will be important, given the leadership role this organization has played in community choice over the years, to really have a good idea about where we're going. And I think the retreat would be a great opportunity to do that.
Alrighty. So thank you, Shalini.
Thanks, everyone.
All right, so we have one last thing here, unless Dawn has another one, but you may have noticed that your place at your seat, there was a very short MCE board survey. It's only 3 questions. It's really possible to fill out before you leave the room tonight. So I would hope that everybody would do that. Dawn, I don't know if you wanted to say more about this survey or any other topic before we release everyone. Kim.
No, I just that Darlene Jackson and our strategic plan team prepared this survey with an eye towards making it really quick and easy to fill out, and asked that I not allow anyone to leave until they've filled it out.
What are we
so
going to
she's
do
not
with
chasing
Director
you down.
Tatson and Director Wilk, who we have more trouble controlling long distance?
Yeah.
We have already turned ours in to Justine.
Nice, all right.
Justine is helping us out. So, yeah, so we can follow their
Showing
good
us up.
example.
Yeah, yeah. All right. Anything else from any staff or board members? And this is the first night of new microphones and the first night of our long distance communication.
So this is Don Tatson. I did want to say one thing. I've had the opportunity over the past couple of months to work closely with Don and other staff members on talking to my colleagues in other Contra Costa jurisdictions about joining MCE. And one, I want to say that the presentations that Don and others have done have been outstanding, whether it be before a Board of Supervisors member or the Board of Supervisors in general or members from cities. But the other thing I found is that obviously the staff has been out working and talking to people in other cities, because I've had a lot of just one-on-one contacts with other city council members and mayors in Contra Costa, and they have all said that one of the things they have liked about MCE was how professional and cooperative and supportive the staff were. And I think a lot of credit to that goes certainly to the staff, but it also goes to my fellow board members who established this organization and built it up. It's been very easy to represent MCE and try to convince other Contra Costa cities to join in. And I'm pleased to see that we've been successful. And I would suggest that one of the other topics for our September retreat is how are we going to manage the growth that is coming our way once all these other jurisdictions join.
That's for sure, Don.
We'll do that some more.
Exactly. Yeah, thank you very much for those comments. And everybody really has done a fantastic job. And I think, a number, as Don mentioned at the beginning, there's a number of directors who really helped out with this current push to explain ourselves in other jurisdictions. That's been very helpful. So anything else from board? Yeah, Tom.
A couple of items. In addition to CalCCA, another good political ally has been the League of California Cities. Their mantra is local control, and most of our issues are as they see them, they're local control issues, and they've been and will continue to be, I think, a good ally for most of our political issues. The second thing is that we just went through a period of about 3 months where we were sort of locked in a battle to the death over who's going to be Contra Costa County's CCA, and it was quite interesting. I mean, I'm telling you, could write a novel on it, and it really did take a village. I mean, the MCE staff, a lot of board members, both in and outside Contra Costa County, and other people pitched in to make this thing work. And it was not a slam dunk. It was down to the wire, really, literally. And but worked, and I think we can look forward to most, if not all, of Contra Costa County joining MCE. And it's the kind of thing, I don't think you want to talk about the details here in public, but if anybody would like to, kind of like the inside story, buy me a beer and I'll tell you about it.
I just wanted to elaborate, because I'm not sure I agree about your comment that it wasn't a slam dunk. By the time we got to the Board of Supervisors, and because I was there, as were you, and listening to the quality of the presentations that were made by the two different entities that were competing for this opportunity, it was night and day. The quality of the presentation that was put on by MCE staff was superb, and I can't imagine any decision coming out of that process based upon that presentation that would have been any different than what we got.
That's why Tom's going to tell you the
Let me amend
backstory.
that.
No, but I had a limited role, but that's all I can say.
I thought by the time you got there, it was a slam dunk, but I can tell you 2 days before, it was wide open.
Everyone raise your hand who wants to buy Tom a beer. That's staff, yeah. All right, I think it would be high time to adjourn this meeting, so thank you all, everybody. We are adjourned.